Now, oral vitamin A dose in less than 6 months age, we know in less than 6 months age, the dose is usually 50,000 units per dose. In 6 months to 12 months of age, the dose is usually 1 lakh international units. Hello friends, in this video we will be discussing the recalled questions of the recently held FMG exam. So the pediatrics questions that came in the exam were relatively easy and straightforward. There were around 20 questions from pediatrics, and most of which we have discussed in all our videos repeatedly. So they were very easy and simple questions. So if you have really, gone through all the videos and have prepared well and have, looked at the previous year's questions, I'm sure it would have been a cakewalk for you. So let us go through these questions one by one. So vitamin K is given at birth to prevent the following. So what is it given for? To prevent hemorrhagic disease of newborn, neonatal asphyxia, neonatal hypoglycemia or hemolytic anemia. So we all know vitamin K is important for the synthesis of many coagulation factors like factor 2, 7, 9 and 10, and vitamin K is given to prevent hemorrhagic disease of newborn. I think there is no confusion on this. So vitamin K is given to all babies at birth 1 milligram intramuscularly to prevent hemorrhagic disease of newborn. And breast milk contains adequate amount of all the vitamins except vitamin D and K, which need to be supplemented, right? So very important. Moving ahead. Infant of diabetic mother is at risk of development of which of the following? So we know a diabetic mother means mother has hyperglycemia. So fetus will have hyperglycemia. Fetal beta cells of the pancreas will get stimulated and fetus will have high levels of insulin. Now after the baby is born, insulin levels are still high. But the excess blood glucose that was coming from mother has been cut off. That supply is cut off. So insulin levels high, glucose supply is not that much. So baby will develop what? Hypoglycemia. So the best answer here is hypoglycemia and not hyperglycemia, even though the mother has diabetes. Anemia? No, these babies rather have polycythemia and they also have more chances of neonatal jaundice, right? And diarrhea also not so common in them. So hypoglycemia is the best answer. So infant of diabetic mother is more at risk of development of hypoglycemia, hypocalcemia, right? And hypomagnesemia and polycythemia and hyperbilirubinemia, right? Okay, and we have discussed infant of diabetic mother in detail in the videos. So now we have a 4-year-old child, okay, 4-year-old child who was staring and he stopped blinking for around 20 seconds. So it looks abnormal. Which of the following drugs? So this looks like a case of absence seizures. So for absence seizures, the drug of choice that we use in India is valproate. So in India, valproate is preferred over ethosuximide. Ethosuximide is actually not available. Phenytoin is usually not preferred in these scenarios, and diazepam and midazolam are drugs which are short-acting benzodiazepines which are used to abort seizures immediately when a child comes with seizure or status epilepticus in the pediatric emergency, right? So the best answer to this question, which in a way is asking the drug of choice for absence seizures in children, is valproate or sodium valproate. Absolute contraindication to breastfeeding. Now absolute contraindication to breastfeeding related to the baby is galactosemia. Because breast milk will contain, so this breast milk is going to contain what? Lactose. And lactose is made up of what we know? Lactose breaks down to give glucose and galactose. Now in galactosemia, it will not be possible for the baby to digest this galactose. And that is why the baby can have manifestations like, the baby can have jaundice, hepatomegaly, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, cataract, CNS malformation, involvement in the form of seizures, etc., right? So galactosemia, if it is there in the baby, then lactose-free diet is to be given and breastfeeding is contraindicated in a child with confirmed galactosemia. Now related to mother, an absolute contraindication is if the mother is on chemotherapy or radiotherapy, then we avoid breastfeeding. Now maternal hepatitis C, CMV, these are not contraindications for breastfeeding. An absolute contraindication, not at all. Okay. All are true about human colostrum except. We know human colostrum is the milk, the thick yellowish milk that comes out in the first 72 hours of life. It is also called the first immunization of the baby because it is rich in immunoglobulins, it is rich in IgA, macrophages are there, right? It is very, very beneficial for the baby. though it is not very tasty because its glucose content is not much. So it is thick and yellow in color, yes. IgA is high, yes. High amino acids and minerals, yes. High sugar and fat, no. The sugar is not high here, okay, because it is not very tasty, but it is very, very beneficial for the baby. Any kind of pre-lacteal feeding should be avoided and colostrum should be fed to all the babies. So the best answer, because there's a word except here, so D is the best answer to this question, right? Always it is very important to read all the options before you jump on to answer. If you would not have read the word except, you would have put tick mark on option A itself without going through all the options. So always a wise thing to do is to at least go through all the options once, even if you know that you know the answer, right? Oral vitamin A dosage in a 2-year-old malnourished child weighing 8 kgs. Now oral vitamin A dose in less than 6 months age, it is, we know in less than 6 months age, the dose is usually 50,000 units per dose. In 6 months to 12 months of age, the dose is usually 1 lakh international units, and more than 1 year age, the dose is usually 2 lakh international units. Okay, but again, if the weight is less than 8 kgs, the dose is going to be 1 lakh here, right? But if the child is weighing 8 kgs and the age is 2 years, so we can take 2 lakh international units as the answer, right? And therapeutic, if there is vitamin A deficiency, clinical features of vitamin A deficiency, then you give it at diagnosis, 24 hours later, and at 14 days also, right? And for prophylaxis, you give some 6 mega doses. Now moving on to fat sugar baby appearance is seen in. So we know kwashiorkor is a condition where the baby is edematous, okay? The baby looks all, edematous and looks chubby, but actually the baby is malnourished. So kwashiorkor, you can get a fat sugar baby appearance. Scurvy, no. Marasmus, you get a very emaciated kind of appearance. Vitamin B1 deficiency or beriberi, you can get features of congestive heart failure and all, but usually this fat sugar baby appearance is not seen, right? A child was malnourished and subcutaneous fat was not there and the skin was wrinkled and muscle wasting was there. So all these are features of deficiency of energy or calories, and it is typically a case of marasmus where the child appears to be totally malnourished and wrinkled skin and edema is not there, okay? So this appears to be a typical case scenario of marasmus. It's not only carbohydrate deficiency, protein deficiency would cause more of edema like in kwashiorkor. Lipid deficiency would be contributing, but it would not be just lipid deficiency, it would be both lipid and carbohydrate deficiency. So, overall it will be deficiency of energy or calories, right? In Menkes disease, there is a disorder of. So, we know Menkes disease is due to mutation in the ATP7A gene, like Wilson's disease is in the mutation of ATP7B gene. So, both of these are involved in the copper metabolism, and in Menkes disease, you can get neurological features. So, there can be developmental delay, regression of milestones, seizures can be there, and you can get some hair abnormalities like trichorexis nodosa, where breaking of shaft of hairs is there, or pili torti kind of a thing. So, kinky hairs can be seen, right? So, Menkes disease is a disorder of copper metabolism that we've discussed in the inborn errors of metabolism. Moving on to a 8-year-old child, okay, we have a 8-year-old child who presented with hepatomegaly and hypoglycemia, and he was diagnosed with deficiency of glucose 6-phosphatase. So, glucose 6-phosphatase deficiency is basically Vaughan-Jarecki disease or type 1 glycogen storage disorder, right? And you can get doll-like faces in this disorder, and the cause of hepatomegaly in this disorder, glycogen is not broken down properly and there is accumulation of glycogen in the liver. So, glycogen accumulates in the liver, okay? It's not glucose accumulation in the liver, it's not glucose accumulation in the muscles. Muscles are not involved in type 1 GSD or Vaughan-Jarecki disease. It is mainly the liver that is involved, okay? Hepatic glycogenosis. So, glucose 6-phosphate accumulation in the liver, no. So, the best answer out of the given options is glycogen accumulation in the liver here, right? Moving ahead to the next question. A child presented with a boil on the leg 2 weeks ago and is now presenting with cola colored urine. What is the diagnosis? So, this appears to be some streptococcal infection of the skin, okay, which was there 2 weeks ago, and now the child is having cola colored urine. He might be having, it's not mentioned, but he might be having hypertension along with it. There can sometimes be oliguria and edema. So, this appears to be a case of nephritic syndrome following this skin infection by a nephritogenic strain of beta hemolytic streptococcus. So, nephritic syndrome is the diagnosis here, and the most common cause for this is PSGN, post-streptococcal glomerulonephritis in children. It is also called post-infectious glomerulonephritis or PIGN. Minimal change disease would typically present as nephrotic syndrome and not nephritic. IgA nephropathy is less common than PSGN, but it can present with features of hematuria. Cola colored urine can sometimes be there, and it is usually between 1 to 2 days after a throat infection or things like that. But if it is like 1 week or more weeks after infection, it points more towards PSGN rather than IgA nephropathy. And IgA nephropathy, you can get a family history as well. Nodular glomerulosclerosis, no, that is not the answer here, right? So you can see you are able to easily reduce the answers. Image of slap cheek appearance along with runny nose and fever. So typical slap cheek appearance is what you get in erythema infectiosum. So you'll get a red rash on the cheek, okay? Sometimes it can be bilateral or it can be unilateral, as if someone has slapped on the cheek. So that is due to the parvovirus infection, the erythema infectiosum, okay? Hand, foot, mouth disease, you get vesicles which are there on the palms or soles, and oral ulcers can be there, low-grade fever can be there, okay? Rubella, the rash is not like this. Rubella has a measles-like rash, but it is less severe, and along with that, there's posterior auricular lymphadenopathy is there. Measles, you can get a brownish rash all over the body, starting from the back of the ears, and it goes away, leaving a brownish discoloration also, and it can be associated with diarrhea, vitamin A deficiency, and so on. It is a contagious illness where the child has a wet look. There can be associated conjunctivitis and coryza. So the given scenario fits in erythema infectiosum, okay, where you can get high-grade fever as well. Moving on to the next case scenario, child presented with palpable rash on the limbs, hematuria and joint pain. There was a history of respiratory infection 1 week ago. What is the probable diagnosis? So we know very, very clearly that this appears typically to be a case of Henoch-Schönlein purpura. Henoch-Schönlein purpura, how do you diagnose it? So there is a clinical diagnosis. Basically, there should be presence of palpable purpura along with presence of any two of the following. So what are these? So there can be arthritis or arthralgia can be there. There can be pain abdomen, okay, and there can be any evidence of kidney involvement, okay, and any biopsy showing IgA deposition, right? Any two of these, if it is there along with palpable purpura, it is Henoch-Schönlein purpura. So what we have here in this given case scenario is there's hematuria. That means kidney involvement is there, and there is joint pain also, okay. So joint pain and rash, palpable rash, history of respiratory tract infection, arthritis or arthralgia, and pain abdomen is there here. Kidney involvement is there. Pain abdomen, though it is not mentioned here. And if you do a biopsy, you can get IgA deposition. So this appears to be a case of Henoch-Schönlein purpura. Rheumatoid arthritis, you will usually not get this palpable rash or hematuria, though joint pain can be there. Hemolytic uremic syndrome, there will be more of anemia will be there. There will be, renal dysfunction in the form of oliguria, edema, and there can be thrombocytopenia leading to bleeding manifestations, okay. Reactive arthritis, again, will usually not present with this palpable rash or hematuria. So the best answer out of the given options is Henoch-Schönlein purpura, okay. A male child presented to you, so this you have a male child who presented with swelling below the ear here in the parotid area, but no systemic manifestations, okay, and there have been two other similar cases in the friends of this child in the same village. What will you do? So these may or may not be associated with fever, and this appears to be a case of mumps, okay, and it is infectious. You can see that other children are also getting it. Immediate hospitalization is not required unless there is some aseptic meningitis or something, when you may need to hospitalize the child. Incision and drainage not required. Mouthwash, again, not indicated. Give antipyretics and send home is the best answer, okay. So antipyretics would help in decreasing the pain and swelling also if it is there, and if some low grade fever and all is also there, it will take care of it. Now, image of a growth chart was line graph which increased at 12 years of age. What does the following growth chart represent? So you have different growth charts for gonadal growth, growth of lymphoid organs, brain growth, and stature or height growth. Let us see what these kind of graphs are. So gonadal growth, you will have a graph like, so for gonadal growth, what will happen? This growth is going to increase in the adolescent age group, and before that it is going to stay in a plateau-like thing. So what you will have as gonadal growth, let us see. So if this is the age and this is the growth, you will have a curve something like this, right? So which will begin to increase by around 10 to 12 years of age, right? So this will show gonadal growth. Now looking at the other options, lymphoid organs. So the growth of lymphoid organs is maximum between 4 to 8 years of age. So growth of lymphoid organs, if you have to represent, so we can represent the growth of lymphoid organs like this. So it will be maximum between 4 to 8 years of age, right? So growth of lymphoid organs, right? What else? So if you have to represent the brain growth, maximum amount of growth of brain takes place in the first 2 to 3 years of life, first 2 years of life to be more precise. So brain growth, if you have to represent, you will represent it like this. So brain growth, initial 1 to 2 years, there will be a huge amount of increase and then it's going to plateau. So this is around like this, age in years. So this represents brain growth, right? And if you think of somatic growth or the stature or height growth, it will usually show a sigmoid kind of a graph. So stature growth will show a sigmoid kind of a graph like. So stature growth is usually going to show a sigmoid kind of a graph where initially in the infantile period the height is going to increase, then it is going to increase very, very slowly at some fixed rate like this, and then again in the puberty adolescent age group it is going to increase like this. So this is somatic growth of increase in stature, right? So this is around 1 year of age, this will be around 10 years of age and so on, right? So if a line graph is there which increased at around 10 to 12 years of age, it would have been gonadal growth, right? So the best answer here is gonadal growth. Lymphoid growth, we saw it will increase maximally between 4 to 8 years of age. Brain growth, we saw it will be there mainly in the first 2 to 3 years of age, and the stature growth would be a sigmoid shaped graph like this, right? So what is there in this question was probably gonadal growth. Okay. Anencephaly image was given. I am sure all of you have seen an anencephaly image. If not, see the pediatric neurology videos. You'll see that the scalp and the cranial bones, everything is absent and the brain is exposed to outside. This is due to the failure of the closure of the rostral or neuropore of the anterior neural tube. So failure of closure of anterior neuropore is the best answer out of the given options. Not the posterior neuropore, not the early closure of neural tube, and premature fusion of cranial sutures. We know is craniosynostosis, which can give rise to abnormal head shape and syndromes like Carpenter syndrome, Fever syndrome, Apert syndrome, Krausen syndrome, and so on. So anencephaly we know is due to failure of closure of anterior neuropore, right? A 2-year-old child, now again a case scenario. These are very, very simple case scenarios. If you have basics in place, no problem in answering this. A 2-year-old child who presented with fever, respiratory rate of 36 per minute and chest indrawing. What is the diagnosis and treatment? So for a 2-year-old child, what is the cutoff for fast breathing? So the cutoff for fast breathing between 1 to 5 years of age is 40 per minute. Okay, if it is more than 40 per minute, if the respiratory rate is more than 40 per minute, then you call it fast breathing, right? I hope you remember the cutoffs. So less than 2 months of age, when do you call it fast breathing? If the respiratory rate is more than 60 per minute, right? 2 to 12 months of age, when do you call it fast breathing? When the respiratory rate is more than 50 per minute. And more than 12 months of age or 1 to 5 years of age, when do you call it fast breathing? When the respiratory rate is more than 40 per minute, right? So in this case, you see that the respiratory rate is 36 per minute. So it is not fast breathing, but chest indrawing is there. So if either fast breathing or chest indrawing is there, then you call it pneumonia. Okay, it is pneumonia. While if any general danger sign is there, then you call it severe pneumonia or very severe disease. Now, what are the general danger signs? They are like persistent vomiting or convulsions or unconsciousness or inability to breastfeed or lethargy, cyanosis. So, they are general danger signs. They are not mentioned here. No general danger signs. So, it is not severe pneumonia. It is not very severe disease. It is pneumonia. Now, if there is pneumonia, what will you do? You give oral antibiotics and ask the child to come back for follow-up. Yes. Just giving antibiotics and sending home is not going to suffice because chest indrawing is also there. That means this child has got pneumonia. There's no fast breathing, but chest indrawing is there. So either fast breathing alone or chest indrawing alone or fast breathing and chest indrawing together, any of these if it is there, we call it pneumonia. So either fast breathing or chest indrawing or both. Call it pneumonia, give oral antibiotics and ask to come for follow-up, right? But if any general danger sign present, then it is severe pneumonia or very severe disease. Okay. A newborn with ambiguous genitalia and high 17-hydroxyprogesterone and progesterone and DHEA levels, which enzyme deficiency? So if you remember the adrenal steroid synthesis pathway, there's a mineralocorticoid pathway, there's a glucocorticoid pathway, and sex steroid pathway. Now what is happening here is this ambiguous genitalia is there and increased 17-hydroxyprogesterone level. That means there is this 21-hydroxylase deficiency, which is the most common cause of CAH or congenital adrenal hyperplasia. What happens in this condition is mineralocorticoids not getting synthesized properly, glucocorticoids not getting synthesized properly, everything is shunted to sex steroid pathway. More and more sex steroid synthesized, so female baby will have a male-like genitalia or ambiguous genitalia. And you will get elevated level of these metabolites like 17-hydroxyprogesterone, progesterone and DHEA. And what else? The baby can have salt wasting, dehydration, shock and hyperkalemia because there is inadequate mineralocorticoid. So 21-hydroxylase deficiency is the most appropriate answer to this question, which is the most common cause of congenital adrenal hyperplasia, as well as we have already discussed in our videos in pediatric endocrinology, right? Which of the following is not included in essential newborn care? So, essential newborn care are some things that you do when the baby is born, at the time of birth and within the first 24 hours of life. What all things do you do? So, we do resuscitation of the baby, we dry up the baby, we keep the baby warm, and we initiate the breastfeeding, okay? And you have to, take care of the eyes of the baby, you clean the baby, you maintain the temperature of the baby. So, all these things are done. Cleaning the baby is done, breastfeeding is done, temperature maintenance is done, care of the eyes are also done, okay? You clean it with a cotton swab, clean cotton swab. But ear care does not form a part of the essential newborn care. So, which of the following is not included in essential newborn care? Then your best answer is ear care, right? So, essential newborn care means you make the baby, keep the baby warm. That means do warm resuscitation, follow the warm chain, clean the baby, dry up the baby, institute breastfeeding early, maintain the temperature of the baby, eye care of the baby, cord care of the baby, keep the cord clean and clamp it properly. But this ear care is not a part of the essential newborn care, right? Now, you had a case scenario where there was some facial abnormality. So, a pear-shaped nose is there and, there can be some abnormalities of the palpebral fissures as well. Thymic hypoplasia. So, the thymus is underdeveloped and tetralogy of Fallot is there. So, all these are features of a syndrome which is due to 22q deletion. That is called DiGeorge syndrome. So, 22q deletion can cause CACH. CACH means there can be this cleft lip or cleft palate kind of a thing can be there. Another C is for conotruncal abnormalities, so heart diseases like truncus arteriosus or tetralogy of Fallot. So, conotruncal abnormalities or cardiac defects. A is for abnormal facies. T is for thymic hypoplasia. And H is for hypocalcemia. So, all these are features of DiGeorge syndrome which is due to 22q11 deletion, and you can detect it by FISH fluorescent in situ hybridization, or you can use MLPA to detect it, okay. 22q11 deletion is there. Down syndrome, we do not get features like this. It is Down syndrome, we all know is trisomy 21 where one extra copy of 21 is there, chromosome. And the most common congenital heart disease in Down syndrome is atrioventricular septal defect or endocardial cushion defect. Turner syndrome we know is a condition where there is 45XO, and Klinefelter we know is a situation where 47 chromosomes are there and there is an XXY, right? So, DiGeorge syndrome is the best answer to this given question, okay. So, these are some very, very important questions that came in the recent exam, the FMG Pediatrics December 2021. And as you can see, we've covered almost all of these questions in our videos. They were very, very simple questions. And if you've gone through all the videos and if you've revised your topics properly, if your basics are clear, I'm sure you must have done very well in these exams. In this exam, and those of you who have appeared and those of you who are going to appear in the forthcoming exams, you can see that the questions still come from the very basics. Even though they are case scenario based questions, you might get overwhelmed looking at them. They might appear to be long questions and complicated at the very outset, but if you read them properly, acknowledging the important points, sieving out the important information from that, you can easily synthesize and arrive to your answer, okay, and excel in your exams. So all the very best, keep working hard, and I'm sure you'll succeed. Thank you.